Hey guys, welcome back to Chapter 5, Episode 3. Today we're focusing on immigration in the past and how it worked at the beginning of Canada and when we were still a colony of England. So last chapter, quick recap, we talked about the point system for accepting economic immigrants. So those people coming over looking for work, skilled workers, etc. Remember the 100 points possible with 67 points to be considered. Education being the highest amount of points, followed by language. And that's what we went over last class. We also briefly talked about, we went over the comic that we read, and today we're going to be talking about how immigration worked in the past. So the first thing we're looking at is no one today is excluded from Canada because of their race or country of origin. The point system, for example, evaluates people based on their skills and education. So nowhere in the points test does it ask your ethnicity, where you're from necessarily. It's all about what are your skills, what's your education. In the past, Canada favored immigrants of British ancestry and restricted, which means did not allow or did not want, immigration from Asian countries such as China and India. And we'll go over that more in detail shortly. So, probably your biggest assignment of this chapter is this one, assignment number 9, called the head tax. Also attached in the link here in the slide, and it'll be in the Google Classroom as well. But the head tax is we're going to talk about what the government did with Asian immigrants that wanted to come over to Canada. So it's a pretty interesting story. So quick review again. What are the different classes of immigration? So we talked about the biggest chunk of the pie there was economic immigrants, so that's skilled workers. We had family class immigrants, so people that already have family here and are coming back later, or coming over later. And we had refugees, so completely separate class of immigrants, but that's people fleeing persecution, torture, cruel and unusual punishment from they're fleeing their country. Not because they want to really, but because they have to, because they're scared. Where immigrants are, making the choice to leave their country and move to Canada. We also quickly went over pull versus push factors. Pull factors being what in Canada is drawing people to want to come here. We talked about briefly free healthcare, our education system, just our acceptance, multiculturalism. There's a whole bunch of things you could think about when it comes to pull factors, and push factors being what in their country of origin was making them want to leave to begin with. We talk about the points test, and then what categories given the most points are the big important factors for this chapter so far. So just something to think about. It's on page 174 if you want to follow along. You don't have to answer any of these questions here. I just want you to kind of hear this guy's story. So, we came to Canada because my parents wanted a better quality of life than in Pakistan. There's so much stress in terms of survival in Karachi, the city I'm from. Crime is one of the major problems. You don't know if you're going to get home safe or not. Canadian society has helped me in every single way. The most important part is welcoming me and integrating me without any concerns. It has provided me with opportunities for education and work. The government of Canada makes sure that our rights and freedoms are protected. I found out about the Calgary Bridge Foundation last year at school. Our teacher invited the foundation to talk about the homework club, where immigrant kids from grades 1 through 12 could get mentors, like me, to assist them with schoolwork. I help kids in grade 5, 6, and 9, especially with math and science, because I'm really good at math and science. Being a volunteer gives me so much personal satisfaction. It helps me so much, just a few hours in the whole week. I've learned a lot about different cultures and traditions. The kids I work with come from Saudi Arabia, India, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, etc. We learn from each other. The most important lesson is how to live together. The big reason I volunteer is that I want to pay back Canadian society for all the things that it has done for me. For welcoming me, not every country does that. It's the story of this guy right here that you see in the picture. It's also on page 174. This is a pretty common story that immigrants have come into Canada. This chapter is really about, as Canadian citizens, looking at what we have and not always taking things for granted, even though I know personally it's tough not to sometimes. So what is Canada's policy towards refugees? Refugees are one of the categories of immigrants established under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. Here is just some background on how Canada's position on refugees has evolved. Canada signed the UN Convention relating to the status of refugees in 1951. During the 1950s and 1960s, Canada offered to shelter refugees in response to specific world crises. In 1976, Canada made refugees one of its immigration categories. This change meant that Canada accepted refugees steadily instead of a crisis-by-crisis basis. So that was a big change in 1976, where it used to be something had to be going on, like a war had to be going on, something serious, natural disaster, etc. Versus once they actually added it as one of their immigration categories, refugees could come as they see fit, which we could debate as well. So some objectives of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. So just what are some of the goals? This is updated in 2002. Save lives and offer protection to people who are displaced and persecuted. 2. Fulfill and affirm Canada's international commitments to protect refugees, meaning like that goes all the way back to 1951, where not just Canada, many countries signed saying we will help refugees. Grant fair consideration to people who claim to be persecuted as an expression of Canada's humanitarian ideals, meaning, yes, they have to, there has to be discussion, but we are granting fair consideration for anyone who claims to be persecuted. And offer refuge to people facing persecution because of race, religion, political opinion, or membership in a social group, and to people who face torture or cruel and unusual treatment or punishment. So it says, what does the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act say about refugees? So this is an example here in this picture. This photo shows Hungarian refugees boarding a flight to Vancouver in 1956. Canada accepted 37,000 refugees from Hungary who opposed the government of their home country, a government that did not tolerate opposition. So these were 37,000 people, and their only crime was disagreeing with their government, and they came to Canada because they would have been persecuted in their own country. And story number 2. Okay, this is another girl. First one was a boy. This is another girl. The first student there was an immigrant, and his family came here. This is an example of a refugee story. So her name is Mary. She's a refugee from Sudan who now lives in Alberta. Sudan was like World War II. People were fighting everywhere, and nobody knew where they were supposed to go. My family got separated. We couldn't find each other. So that's how I became a refugee. Later I learned that my mom was alive and in Canada. So in 2005, I came here with my 2 brothers. I was 12 years old, and my brothers were 8 and 9. Again, this is family got separated. This is a girl. This is a girl who was 12 years old, and her brothers were 8 and 9. When we landed in Calgary, my mom came and picked us up at the airport. I hadn't seen her for 8 years. I didn't remember her. She seemed like another lady. But because she was my mom, I thought, okay, I guess I'll hug her. When I came to Canada, I didn't know what it would be like. I didn't know it was a nice country. I didn't know it was a safe country. I thought there would be war and fighting, like in Sudan. I worry about my dad and my stepmom and my stepbrothers. I worry about them, and when I hear on the news that people are still fighting in Sudan, I hope that they're safe. Canadians are lucky to live where there is no war, and they are lucky to have good schools. They should thank God because they are lucky. Very two drastically different stories between the guy and the girl. Incredible story when you really sit down and think about it again. That's on page 178 if you want to read it on your own. But just from her experience, she just can't believe. She doesn't even know that there is existence of places where there was no war going on. How has immigration policy changed in response to security concerns? So some more updates. Immigration Act in 1976. No person shall be granted admission who is a member of any of the following classes. So I know some of you guys brought this up in our discussion. Persons who have engaged in acts of espionage or subversion against democratic government institutions or processes as they are understood in Canada. Basically, that means that, again, this is 1976, so you would not be allowed to immigrate to Canada or claim being a refugee if you were acting against a government that's like Canada. So if you were a criminal in a country similar to Canada, like the United States, for example, or the first world countries, you couldn't claim you're a refugee because you're going to be persecuted there, because you would be persecuted in Canada. If it's a crime in Canada that you committed in another country, then you would not be able to be an immigrant here or claim refugee status. And persons who there are reasonable grounds to believe will, while in Canada, engage in or instigate the subversion by force of any government. So you got to think about wars going on here. So you're considered to be possible spy for another country. So update, Immigration and Refugee Protection Act 2002. So you can see they changed the name. A permanent resident or a foreign national is inadmissible on security grounds for, and they have a bunch more here now, go through this. So these are things that you could be not allowed in to Canada for. Engaging in an act of espionage or an act of subversion against a democratic government, okay, so same as before. Engaging in or instigating the subversion by force of any government. Engaging in terrorism. Being a danger to the security of Canada. Engaging in acts of violence that would or might endanger the lives of safety of persons in Canada, or being a member of an organization that there are reasonable grounds to believe engages, has engaged, or will engage in acts referred to in paragraphs A, B, or C. So you'll think about terrorists here. So there are security measures in place. If there's any fear that you might be a danger to people already in Canada, you are not going to get in. Just another fun fact, did you know? Many events and issues in other parts of the world can result in people applying as immigrants to Canada or refugees. For example, natural disasters such as floods and earthquakes, population pressures, war, poverty. So it doesn't have to always be a war. That's the one that people go to, but it can be natural disasters as well. That is it for Chapter 5, Episode 3. And that is mostly based on some refugee stories that we talked about. Going forward into Episode 4, we'll be talking about collective rights and how they connect with immigration. But again, this chapter, I really want to think about how security measures are put in place to protect Canadians. And again, the differences between immigrants and refugees. Great job, guys. See you next time.